Hey, welcome to Bowen Family Systems Theory and Model. Today I will be going over some of the Bowen theories and just about Bowen himself, the lenses that he uses that affect how he sees things in the family. This week there are a number of videos for you to watch as well. Some of them show Bowen explaining about his theory, which I think is always lovely to be able to hear it from the mouth of the person who created the model. There are some other good short descriptions of the model. So hopefully between this lecture, some of those videos, and then there's another lecture by Diane Gayhart, who wrote another textbook about marriage and family therapy models. You will get a good sense of Bowen. And on Friday in our lab, we will also be doing a case conceptualization. You don't have a case conceptualization due for Bowen Family Systems theory. I thought the first time we do it would be nice for you to just get a sense of it. So we'll go over that in the lab using the Lee family from Everything I Never Told You, that book. And um, anyway, if you have other questions or things like that, I'll look forward to hearing them. All right, and let's get to it. Going to share this PowerPoint. And some of you have asked that I put PowerPoints in the content for the week, and I will start doing that. As you have probably experienced already, most of my PowerPoints are not heavy on words and on points. It's more something for you to look at and kind of consider as I talk about what's going on. If it helps you in taking notes to slow down and pause, by all means do that. A lot of what you will be tested on and what I want you to understand are the kind of big salient points. So if I kind of go over something really quickly, don't expect that you'll have to know every little thing I talk about. So Bowen Family Systems Theory, created by Murray Bowen. He was a psychiatrist born in the 1920s. And this model, as we'll talk about a little bit more later, mostly is a lot of theory and application of some of the principles that we've already talked about. Some of the models that we will talk about in the future are more heavy on what you do, on the interventions. And of course, as you read in the chapter, there are specific ways to intervene, but what that looks like is less focused on in this model. So a little meme humor for you. Take a minute and enjoy that. This is Gru's plan for becoming evil. Could also be a plan for cultivating low differentiation, or it could also be a model for how to have a dysfunctional family. So Murray Bowen, the founder of this model, and we'll talk more in just a minute about the lenses that that are important to understand about him in learning this model and evaluating it and whether it's a good fit for you. All of these models that we talk about in this class have important things to offer in conceptualizing families. You will find that some fit better for you because of the lenses that you have and the experiences that you have. So we'll talk about that some more. Also, there are, like I said, videos of Bowen teaching about his model, and those will be fun for you to watch so you can get more of a sense of him. So some of the lenses that Murray Bowen had, like I mentioned, he was a psychiatrist. He completed medical school, and it was only at the end of medical school that he decided he wanted to work with people as a psychiatrist. Um, so he had a lot of that medical background. He was, of course, a white, well-educated male, and that's part of his the lenses that he had. Also, the time period that he worked in. Um, and he examined schizophrenia. So he worked in mental hospitals. And in his time, schizophrenia was beginning to be conceptualized in terms of how the family impacted it. One of the things that they noticed was if they took someone who was schizophrenic out of the family system and treated them in a mental hospital, sometimes with medication, but with therapy and things like that, the person with schizophrenia was likely to have a large symptom reduction. They seemed to function better and do well. And then the psychiatrist would say, great, they're doing better. We'll put them back in the family. And what they noticed was a lot of recidivism. Once the schizophrenic got back into that family system, all of the symptoms came back. And so they started to think, maybe there's something going on in these families. And because mothers were the primary caretakers at that time, mothers got blamed a lot. And it was kind of seen as the mother being too demanding or creating what they called a double bind, which was to demand something, but then also at the same time say that that could not be given or wasn't okay. And kind of like with Gru's mom, he had to be evil, but nothing he did was enough. And it was really problematic. Now, what we understand now is it wasn't all about moms. There's definitely some biological issues. There were definitely some family system issues. And there was a larger societal system that put mom in this kind of traditional role that made her the caretaker and kind of the recipient of a lot of the anxiety, holder of a lot of the anxiety of the family. And so blaming moms was not a great idea, but that was Murray Bowen's time. Like I said, he was an educated white male. He actually was starting to look at these things in the 1950s. So traditional families were very important then. He finished his work in the 1980s, died in 1990. But that was a time, of course, as you know, in our societal history, that traditional families were quite important. Women had had an opportunity to get into the workforce with World War II, but then kind of as their patriotic duty, they were called back to be in the home, while men had the opportunity to be in the workforce and to provide for their families. So that more traditional view of family was definitely part of Murray Bowen's lens. This is a video. We're not going to watch it right now, because I think if I click on the link, it actually will not screen share that very well. But you can look it up if you'd like to. It's an interesting perspective on Bowen as a person, and as he talks about his approach to the family. Kind of gives a sense of him in his later years and how he saw things. Okay, so as I said, a lot of Bowen systems theory and model is about the theory. And what he did particularly was applying systems theory, which was kind of a new concept to be applied to families. He did just that, and he was a pioneer in applying systems theory to families. So as he watched families as a psychiatrist and in these mental health settings, he started to see ways in which the family organized as a unit and as a system. And so anxiety, which was another big point that he has, kind of got dealt with in the family system. And so he looked at how does the anxiety, which is a normal part of any organism has to deal with anxiety. which in this case doesn't mean anxiety like generalized anxiety disorder, but rather just um, the stressors of life and the stressors of survival. Of course, in our time, we don't have quite the same stressors of survival, but as organisms, as humans, we do experience relational tensions, societal tensions, and things like that as stressors and anxiety inducing. So he looked at how that anxiety got passed around and fixed in the family, and used systems theory to conceptualize that. So systems theory was a really important piece of this, of his conceptualization. Anxiety was an important piece. And then he also looked at kind of in the human individual, the rational or thinking system and the emotional system, which are both parts of our brain. And he thought of there being kind of this healthy synthesis in the feeling system. He defined feeling as different than emotional. And the feeling system was a way to find balance between these two systems in a less automatic way, so that hopefully the individual could, instead of just reacting, be more proactive and thoughtful and intentional. Then he also talked about connection versus independence. Um, and if you read his book he wrote with Michael Kerr, there is kind of a sense that independence maybe is valued a little bit more highly than connection. Um, of course, there is the understanding that as humans, we need connection. We are very social creatures. We need that sense, as I've talked about before, of um, acceptance and feeling worthy and loved and valued, and all of those things that come from connection. We also do, of course, need to have a sense of autonomy and independence. So, coming from his lens and time period, it makes sense that he, as a man, felt that that need to be independent and to be kind of maybe less connected or able to um, regulate the connections in such a way that allowed him and people to be what he called differentiated, and we'll talk a lot about differentiation, was really important. So he said, you've got a choice: individuality or togetherness. And ideally, and I'm going to say this maybe less that this was what Murray Bowen himself truly conceptualized, but as the model has grown and kind of come into the modern age, and as we as people dealing with families can understand, there really does need to be a balance. When I talk to clients, I talk about two sides of a coin. I kind of do this. There's the individuality side, the need for autonomy, and also the ability to self-regulate, the ability to validate yourself, the ability to take care of yourself. That's really important. On the other side of the coin, there really is that need for connection, the need for um, feeling like you're part of something bigger than you. And then again, that sense of being loved and worthy and accepted and safe, and all those things that come from connection. And so balancing those two sides is important. And one of the criticisms that Bowen's theories have received is that it's more heavy on the independence side. And um, he kind of pathologized mom's tendency to be more emotionally connected to the children, maybe to maybe be like hovering, and pathologizing what was kind of given women as a role didn't go over very well with some people. So here's a reflection question for you. What were some of the sources of anxiety in your family growing up? Now, 8 concepts for um, Bowen. So you will have read through these. One of the readings for this week, in addition to the chapter, is from the website that goes over each of these 8 concepts. So I'm not going to go over them uh, in a lot of detail, because hopefully you will have done the reading on that website, and that goes over, it's like a couple of pages on each of these concepts, as well as some really helpful kind of conceptualization using an actual family, seeing how this concept would play out in real life. But I'll go over them briefly. So the nuclear family system is basically what I talked about in the beginning, just of the family. The nuclear family is conceptualized in some ways as a unit, an organism, and systems theory can be applied in the relationships between the parts of this family, nuclear family. So as we think about things like negative and positive feedback, and we think about some of the other, like other systems, things that we talked about last week, maybe the how we don't have a linear process, we have circular processes and things like that. All of those are going to be applied in the family system. The family projective process is how the family deals with the anxiety that it's feeling. And what Bowen conceptualized is that that anxiety often gets stuck or fixed or projected in a certain way, so that it can be kind of contained instead of just being this free floating anxiety that impacts everyone. And this can happen, and we'll talk about this later in the semester as we talk about internal family systems. This can happen within an individual also. But the family projective process would be where maybe there's kind of a bunch of anxiety, maybe parents are feeling anxiety, and maybe it's kind of a diffuse anxiety. Maybe there are things going on like stressors at work or in the like community. Maybe there's financial stressors. Maybe there are stressors from kind of the not the immediate family, and those are kind of coming in. And so maybe parents start to look for, why am I feeling anxious? What's going on? How can I fix it? And they may see a problem in a child. Maybe it's something that's actually developmentally appropriate, or something that doesn't have to be that big of a deal, but the parents see, oh, there's this problem. And then as they kind of focus anxiety into that problem, maybe the child's behavior, that their focus of the anxiety becomes a positive feedback loop. And so something is wrong, we're going to put more and more attention to it, we're going to try to change it. And as more attention goes on to that, maybe the symptoms actually grow because it is serving a purpose somehow to have these symptoms. And then as those symptoms grow, the parents' fears are confirmed, and becomes more and more of a problem. And then that anxiety becomes symptomatic for that person. In one of the videos that Bowen, that is in the content, Bowen is talking about this process, and he points out that those symptoms can become physical symptoms. They can become like behavioral symptoms. They can become mental health symptoms. So any of those, maybe we are conceptualizing as a way that this family projective process is creating a problem within one person in order to kind of capture and contain that anxiety. So if you are looking at a family, and we've talked about this with systems theory, instead of saying, well, this one person has this problem, we might look at what, and this is going to sound weird maybe, but what function does this person having this problem serve in the family? And maybe what does it serve in kind of the extended family also? You could look at, for example, multiple generations, maybe a mom who is not very functional, relies a lot on the rest of the family, maybe has some mental health or somatic symptoms. What is that serving? How is that serving the family? Well, a lot of the anxiety and the attention goes to her. Everybody kind of works to help make the family functional kind of around her. And maybe she has those symptoms because of something that happened when she was a child. And so that takes us into the next, these 8 concepts: multi-generational transmission. So multi-generational transmission basically just means that the same patterns that happened in a previous generation of there being anxiety, maybe one person kind of becomes the recipient of that anxiety, or anxiety is triangulated. We'll talk more about that in a minute. That then impacts the next generation, and that anxiety may be passed down into the next generation. Also, the levels of differentiation that happen because of the way the family dealt with anxiety get passed down. And so the transmission of patterns and levels of differentiation affect not just that nuclear family, but also the next generation, and on and on. Emotional cutoff. Emotional cutoff, you could say, could be like a protective factor or a defense mechanism. If one person in the family feels overwhelmed by the anxiety, one of the things that they can do is kind of put up emotional walls. So maybe they refuse to deal with somebody else in the family, or maybe they refuse to deal with the family entirely, or maybe they refuse to deal with certain aspects of the family. Like, we cannot talk about I don't know, abuse that happened, or we cannot talk about political differences. Like, I just, none, I'm putting up a wall. So that would be emotional cutoff. Now, Bowen would conceptualize this as an unhealthy and undifferentiated way to deal with the anxiety, because instead of becoming more differentiated and figuring out how to kind of deal with the emotions and the difficult challenges that come up in the family because of the anxiety, you're just cutting yourself off. So he would perceive that as problematic. And it can be, certainly. It also, as I said, can be conceived as a defense mechanism. So maybe the person, as they are cut off, give themselves some space. Maybe they can create some healthy coping mechanisms. Maybe they can pull in some other resources, some other kind of social supports. Maybe they figure out how to self-regulate a little bit better. And as they hopefully attain a higher level of differentiation, maybe they can start to re-engage with that family. Sibling position. This wasn't actually originally Bowen's idea. This was another kind of a contemporary of his, Walter Toman, talked a lot about sibling position and just things that he noticed in terms of roles that siblings often picked up because of their birth order. So maybe the oldest is more like a leader and the youngest is more of a follower. Often the second is conceptualized as being kind of a peacemaker, or a middle child could be kind of a peacemaker, somebody that needs to be able to see lots of angles and help things go well. Of course, depending on what's going on in the family and other factors, these might not pan out. And talks more about that in the reading on the website, the Bowen Foundation website. So sibling position may impact people's roles, may impact who gets triangulated, and may impact who cuts off, things like that. Okay, societal emotional processes. So last week we talked about Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems model, and how there is these kind of rings of different systems, as well as the chrono system, the time. And so societal emotional processes, this idea is kind of that what is happening in a family has parallels in what's happening in some of the bigger societal um, systems, and vice versa. So, for example, if there is a societal pattern of um, maybe kind of um, prejudice, or taking the stress of the system and putting it on one ethnic group, or one social group, maybe people low socioeconomic status, and we saw that in World War II. There was a lot of problems in German society because from World War I, there's just like all these reparations that were demanded, and this massive recession, depression economically, and the whole country was doing really poorly. And so they were taking that stress, and Hitler said, hey, I've got an idea. Let's blame the Jews. They're the scapegoat. And now we're going to channel all of our anger and frustration on them. Well, that same system can happen within a family. Also can happen with, in American society in the 60s, which Bowen was living in. There was some like societal unrest because of Vietnam War. There was societal unrest because of civil rights movement. And so a lot of people and kind of society started to focus in on specific groups as the problem groups. And there was a lot of backlash from that for those groups sometimes. Sometimes there was also progress, and that was good. So those societal emotional processes, um, as Bowen conceptualized, can be kind of also seen in the family, and vice versa, that there's parallels. So again, that kind of harkens back to that ecological systems theory. Emotional triangles. So emotional triangles are a way to stabilize a relationship that maybe is not as stable as it needs to be. So, for example, maybe one of the parents has a mental or physical health issue, and it causes tension in their relationship. Maybe the other parent doesn't feel like they have the physical and emotional energy to support the parent that has this problem, and also support the rest of the family, and also do their job or whatever it is. And so they triangulate in, and maybe both parents triangulate in a child who maybe is going to help out. Maybe both parents talk to that child. Maybe that child gets parentified and kind of becomes a caretaker for the younger children, or makes things happen at home where the parent isn't making that happen at home. So the other parent is more free to do whatever they need to do. Um, so that triangulation can happen in that way. Triangulation could happen also, as we see in the Lee family, that maybe each parent has some stressors that come from past generations or from societal influences, that they do not are not very differentiated, and so they try to fulfill their lack of differentiation by kind of bringing a child in and having the child do that for them, to be the person they wanted to be. So that's another way triangulation can happen. And then differentiation of self. We're going to talk a fair amount about differentiation, because Bowen kind of saw this as the answer to everything. So a reflection question for you. How did one of those 8 concepts that we just talked about play out in your family? as I'm talking about those, or as you were reading about them this week, probably something sparked in your mind, like, I think I saw that in my family, or that fit in this way. So I'd love to hear how that fit. All right. So differentiation, the process of becoming yourself, and as Bowen saw it, the answer to every problem. So differentiation is a term that was borrowed from a more medical model, not surprising since that was Bowen, one of Bowen's lenses. He trained as a doctor. And differentiation is the process that cells have when they go from a stem cell to whatever type of cell they're going to be. And so differentiation is about kind of becoming yourself, becoming whatever your role is. And Bowen saw this as an important process for individuals in a family to differentiate from the family ego mass, he called it. So, as we've said, the family was conceptualized and is conceptualized as a whole system. And the ego mass is kind of a way of saying that the whole system is connected. They interact with each other and impact each other a good amount. So becoming differentiated means that you had a way to kind of not be so pulled around by the system, not be so automatic in your thinking and your actions and the way you felt, but that you could be more intentional. So this teeter-totter that you see here, as I talked about earlier in this video, Bowen wanted to kind of balance between the thinking system and the emotional system. He wanted to balance between connection and independence, and differentiation was the way to find the balance. So differentiation basically means being able to maybe have a larger view of the system, to not be so fused. Bowen used the word fused also, in that you see the ladder. Oh, I'm afraid my video may be blocking some of it, but there's kind of these two sides of the ladder, and it starts out pretty close together and then diverges, and there's emotion and thinking. And you see at the bottom there's a circle and a square that are quite kind of overlapping. And on the other side, and that's symbolizing low differentiation, that there's fusion, that the family members kind of take each other's anxiety, and one person's anxiety really impacts somebody else's anxiety. And there's just a lot of kind of automatic things happening. And then the differentiation is where there's less fusion. Bowen said you can never have complete differentiation because we do need that connection, but there's less fusion. There's more separation between that circle and that square. And that symbolizes the person's ability to not be so impacted by the workings of the family, to step outside of that and to make their own decisions about how they handle anxiety, about how they interact with other people, about how they receive or don't receive some of the messages from the family. Now, as I mentioned earlier, one of the criticisms of Bowen's theory is kind of the way it pathologized women's roles. You could imagine that it would be a lot easier to be able to step outside of that family system if you've got a whole other system like work that reinforces your value, where you find safety, where you get paid for your labor. And so to say, well, what's happening in the system is kind of pathological, but look how well men do at differentiation. Not so great. Bowen himself identified a time that he felt like he had to improve his differentiation, which he did by kind of getting some distance from his family. He wrote a paper about detriangulating from his parents and kind of becoming himself more. And he also talks about differentiation as really important for therapists, because he says a therapist cannot help anybody else become more differentiated than they are themselves. And a therapist is going to become part of whatever therapeutic system they are treating. And so the therapist, in order to not kind of be pulled into a triangle by the system they're treating or be unduly influenced by that system, has to maintain a high level of differentiation. Um, so that differentiation can be a model, it can be a way to have a healthy relationship and to be able to be part of the system and help influence the therapeutic system without getting pulled into it. Then part of what Bowen saw as the answer, like I said, differentiation is the answer to everything. A lot of what Bowen saw as the therapeutic work is maybe taking the most differentiated person and helping them get even more differentiated, because then that he saw that as being able to help the whole system to kind of detriangulate and to handle anxiety in a different way. So thinking about differentiation was a big piece of his therapeutic process. All right, another reflection question for you. What do you think, or who do you think was the most and least differentiated person in your family? And what makes you think that? What did you see? And maybe as you're conceptualizing that differentiation for yourself, um, maybe you feel like you were the most differentiated person. What allowed you to be differentiated? Or if it was somebody else, what allowed them to be differentiated? All right. So another important piece of Bowen systems, and this is actually something that can be used, like most of these concepts can be used in other models also, but genograms can be helpful in a lot of ways. Some of the therapists that I work with use a genogram for every family and even every individual that they work with. That's how they start. It's a really good way to assess and conceptualize some of the family dynamics. This is something that Bowen used extensively. Kind of a modified genogram can also be used in structural family systems, or family model, which we'll talk about next week. So getting a sense of how to use a genogram is important. As you can see here, there are a lot of standard symbols that can help you as you're creating the genogram. One of the videos for this week also talks about using genograms and how they can be helpful, and it takes you through the process of creating a genogram. But understanding these symbols can be important also. So we have basic symbols for male and female. Now, as we are starting to have a sense that gender can be more expansive than that binary, there can be symbols for transgender people also. As you see there, it shows that triangle inside of the male or female. This is an older version. We now show transgender as the person's assigned gender inside and the person's preferred or identified gender as outside. If somebody identifies as non-binary, or it could be an unborn child whose sex you don't know yet, that is usually indicated by a triangle. So birth date will be a little marking out to the side with the year, and death date can be indicated with a little dash on the other side of the line with that year. Also, death is indicated by an X. Age can be put inside. So then relationships. There's the relationship of marriage, as you can see there. It's typical to put the date of marriage right above that line that indicates the marriage. Living together is also an important relationship. Often children come from a relationship in which people are just living together. So that's a dashed line. Um, Separation. So this doesn't mean divorce. This just means they're not living together. That would be a single line. Divorce is a double line. They get back together. That's that double line with a slash through it. Uh, and then other relationships that aren't marriage, that maybe are not even family relationships, can be indicated by a kind of that line as you see out to the side, and their relationship with maybe work or with their profession. So then children, children are almost always listed in birth order. Occasionally, if you're doing a genogram and you've started with the focus person, and that focus person usually is indicated by there being two. So like if it's a female, there will be two circles, or that can be also called the index person. But sometimes if you start with that index person and they're kind of in the middle, and then you're doing their siblings, and turns out there was like 10 siblings who were born after them, maybe you don't have room. So maybe you kind of arrange how you need to. But typically, children are listed in birth order. And there is, as you can see, those symbols. Foster children are indicated by a dotted line. So that means that there was that relationship and they were a child in the family for a period, but were never legally part of the family. Then an adopted child, you can see, is both the line and the dotted line. Drug and alcohol abuse are indicated, as is mental health. Drug or alcohol abuse is usually, there's like a line drawn through the circle or the square, and what's like kind of the bottom part of the line is shaded in, and that indicates that there is abuse. If the person recovers from that abuse, the shading isn't so thick. And then for mental health, or other problems like that, there's also a line drawn through, but then instead of a horizontal line, it's a up and down, a vertical line. There we go, my words. A vertical line with one half shaded. And again, if there's recovery, then that shading is less. If there's both substance abuse and mental health, which is pretty typical, or is not surprising at least, to have those kind of dual diagnoses, then there's both the horizontal and the vertical line and kind of 3/4 shaded in. Then those relationships. So relationships are, and what you see in relationships are really an important part of a genogram. This is not just like family history showing the multiple generations. And as you do a genogram, 3 generations, you hope for at least 3 generations. 4 generations is better. As many as you can do lets you see the patterns in the family, which can be really valuable. So at least 3 generations, and then looking at the relationships between those people. So the marriage, you've got the lines coming down and then over. Marriage is a legal relationship, but then you can also indicate what kind of relationship that is. So maybe it's a marriage in which there's a lot of hostility. And so then you would have kind of the zigzag line between the square and the circle, or between whatever is that marriage, those people in the marriage. A positive relationship is just indicated by a single line. If the relationship is kind of distanced, but not to the point of cutoff, maybe there's a dashed line. If there's people who are close, quite close, then there's a double line. Maybe they're kind of allies in the family. If it feels like they're fused, like there's very little differentiation, what one person does or experiences massively impacts the other person, then that would be 3 lines. If there's closeness but also hostility, then you can combine like the double line plus the zigzag line. Sometimes there's a lot of focus. So maybe there's a family member who's kind of holding that anxiety for the family, and they have some mental or physical health concerns. And so there's a lot of attention, maybe from both parents or one parent, on that person. Maybe there's a lot of caretaking. And so then there would be an arrow because that relationship is a very focused relationship. When there is distance, but it's not just kind of distance, there's like actual cutoff, then there's a line with like a kind of a cutoff symbol. Um, you can see it. Yeah, it's there at the bottom. And when there's abuse, that can be physical, emotional, or sexual abuse, there's a line, kind of a wavy line from the perpetrator to the victim of that abuse. So those are some basic symbols that you can think about as you're doing genograms. When you do your self-reflection paper for this class, which is due at the end of this week, having a genogram for yourself would be really valuable. Also, we'll create a genogram for the Lee family. And when you're doing a case conceptualization for a family other than the Lee family, when you're doing your model presentation, please do include a genogram. And that will be for all the models that we do. Having a genogram is just a really good way to help us all see what's going on briefly and get a sense of the family, be able to conceptualize the family in that kind of foundational level. So let's look at a genogram now and talk about this case. Hopefully you can see the whole thing and the little video of me is not covering it up. So we can see that the index person, the person of focus here, is Lynn, a woman who is 65. Now, one of the other things that this genogram does, and this is one of the readings for the week also, it's an ethnic or cultural genogram. And cultural genograms can be valuable as you're conceptualizing some of the broader societal influences. And you may, in your reflection paper, you may want to include shading or other things that indicate for you what your cultural genogram may look like, because there are usually cultural influences. Even if you and your family have been in America for 400 years, there may still be cultural influences because there are probably immigrants along the line some way that had experiences that impacted your family. I think I talked briefly in a previous video about some of my more recent immigrants being from Germany and coming when there was kind of a cultural shift such that the educated folks were no longer welcome. And so they came to America, and that focus on education and on hard work and some of those cultural principles, I really do still see in my family. So that's maybe something you want to include. And it's something that's included here. You can see the legend to the side. Yellow indicates German, green is Irish, orange is Dutch. And so you may talk to Lynn about how those cultural influences from her father and mother impacted her, what she noticed societally about how they were treated, or how they clashed, or some of those things, how that impacted the anxiety in the family. You can also see that Lynn's father experienced, now this is, so that horizontal line usually indicates substance abuse. Here it says that there was a psychological problem of bipolar. So I don't know whether this was simply done in a different way than is normal, or whether there was also substance abuse, but there was, it looks like, some mental health at least, and that was probably in Lynn's family of origin a source of anxiety. And as you can see, um, there is also some hostility between Lynn, who is, it looks like, the youngest in her family, and her dad. Now, as we look at ages, looks like there was a stillborn son, and then it looks like Lynn may actually be the same. I don't know. So it says 65 for both Carol. Oh, I see. So Carolyn has passed away. I was going to say Carolyn's birth year is 36. Lynn's birth year is 46. They both say 65, but it looks like Carolyn passed away at age 65. And um, that's why she still has 65 in her circle. Um, so it looks like there was some closeness between Lynn and her older sister Carolyn. Um, it also looks like there was some distance between Lynn and her mom, and also there's a lot of focus from Lynn to her mom, who now is dead. So I would be curious to find out, what is that focus about? Is there some ways in which Lynn is trying to deal with maybe her mom not having protected her from her dad? If there was that hostility between her and her dad, maybe Lynn is focused on her mom, trying to understand why her mom didn't nurture her or take care of her the way she would have liked, and how that has impacted Lynn through her life. That's maybe how I would interpret that symbol. And I'd be curious to find out what happened in Lynn's childhood between her and her dad, how the anxiety was handled. Looks like mom and dad were pretty close. There may be a triangle here between mom and dad and Lynn. Um, there's also, it looks like, some hostility between the oldest sister and Lynn's older sister Emily. And then it looks like maybe some cutoff even between Lynn and Emily. I'm not sure what symbol they're trying to show there. It kind of looks like a cutoff symbol with a circle between it. Maybe that means that there has been cutoff before, but now there is some resolution. So that would be something to investigate. Then it looks like Lynn is no, it looks like she's a teacher. So that line out to the psychiatrist could indicate a couple of things. Sometimes it may indicate that the psychiatrist is conceptualizing themselves as part of this system. It could also mean that Lynn has had a relationship with her psychiatrist that was helpful or impactful for her. So then in Lynn's family, we see closeness between her and her husband and her younger son, Joseph. It looks like there's a triangle there. And Joseph is the younger one. He's a musician. I wonder if he's still living at home. Looks like he is 26. And if there is that triangle between the three of them, that son may feel like he needs to live at home in order to continue stabilizing things. It also looks like there's some hostility between Lynn and her older child, Sarah. And so I'd be curious about what that hostility looks like, how it's come about. Is that hostility about Sarah trying to differentiate herself from the rest of the family? It looks like Joseph is close also to Sarah. I would start to guess maybe Joseph is kind of a recipient of the family's anxiety, as both somebody who's triangled in and also somebody who's really close to Sarah, maybe trying to stabilize that relationship with Sarah in the family when there's the hostility between her and mom, Lynn. So those are some of the things that we can see in this case. So with Lynn, as the index person, of course, we see a lot of her relationships. Like I said, differentiation would be a key goal for Bowen Family Systems theory. So, and the model. So maybe the therapist would help Lynn start to differentiate by examining her relationship with her mom, looking at why that's distant. What were some ways that her mom wasn't there, maybe healing from some of those traumas. Both mom and dad have passed away, so we can't bring them into the session, but there may be some opportunity for kind of visualization, maybe an empty chair exercise where Lynn gets to talk to mom in proxy, does empty chair, work some things out, maybe rewrite some memories in which mom was not there, did not stand up for Lynn, and let Lynn say what would have been helpful for her, what she needed. And in doing that process can help Lynn self-regulate a little bit better, take more responsibility for herself, um, kind of let lie some of those old relationships that continue to create anxiety for her. And then as she begins to differentiate in that way, maybe she can let go of some of the need to triangulate in Joseph and start to let him differentiate a little bit also. Maybe it's nice to have that closeness with Joe, with her husband, but being able to balance, of course, the closeness and the different or the independence and the autonomy. So those are some of the things that a Bowen systems therapist may be looking at, maybe working towards with the family. If this therapist gets to talk to the whole family, particularly in this case, Joe, Lynn, Sarah, and Joseph, being able to talk about how each of the family members perceives the system, how they see the relationships in the system, how they perceive the anxiety being dealt with in the system can be helpful to get some more uh, angles, some more perspectives. And then maybe if there's somebody else in the system who is better differentiated and and can help if the family, if the therapist is working with the whole family, then they can start working not just with Lynn on helping her increase her differentiation and her self-regulation and kind of healing some old wounds, but help other people deal with their maybe lower differentiation and increase that. One of the other criticisms of Bowen Family Systems model is that although he certainly does look at the whole family system, he may have worked more pointedly with one family member instead of the whole system. So there we go. That is kind of what I've got for you for Bowen Family Systems in a nutshell today. Of course, there's a lot more that you can learn from the reading and the videos that are in content for this week. I hope that you will bring any questions that you have to the lab. If you're not able to make it to the labs on Friday, feel free to shoot me an email with questions that you have, and I will make sure to answer those in the lab. And then, of course, the lab will get posted, so you'll have access to that. That's all for now, and look forward to seeing you on Friday and talking more about conceptualizing the Lee family in these terms. Okay.